Hello, everyone. I'm here with Sean Chiplock, voice of Spider-Man and Marvel's Avengers. So, Sean, how you been?
It's been a very busy week. I actually overslept a pilot relight appointment this morning, which sucks because we need to start heating this place now that the winter weather is starting to hit us. But other than that, went to a movie premiere for Sword Art Online Progressive. Been knocking out auditions all week. Got a little bit of a busy week ahead of me. So going into the holiday season, I'm definitely going to be earning the money I need to buy everyone gifts. How about yourself?
Pretty good here too, and hang in there as usual. COVID, whatnot, and
Hmm.
now with this Omicron thing, let's hope it doesn't get too far.
Did you get your booster scheduled yet, or
I'm thinking about it, but I'm not quite sure about it yet. So,
okay?
yeah.
You
So,
are you're fully vaccinated though in the
I am
meantime,
fully
right?
vaccinated. Yes.
I would recommend it. Like the booster did knock me on my butt for a day. I was triple Pfizer. So the third time when I got the booster, the following day I had like a little bit of the shakes, like my body was a little sore. Honestly, the most of it was that I was taking too long to take the pain medication. But once I did, I was fine. And it lasted less than a day. By the following day, it was gone. So
I will definitely think about that. I haven't think about getting the shot, the booster. I gotta just check the scheduling and whatnot, and
yeah.
hopefully I'll
Are
get it
you
soon.
did you go Pfizer or Moderna?
Moderna.
I would consider switching to Pfizer for the booster because there is evidence that mixing the two vaccines does help with its efficiency overall. It's fine if you do all three the same, but there is like data that suggests if you did Pfizer and go Moderna, or if you did Moderna and go Pfizer, it is slightly more effective.
Very good. Yeah, I'll definitely consider that, Sean. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this leads me to my first question. Thanks for doing this interview.
Yeah.
So when was that moment for you when you realized you wanted to be in entertainment?
Oh man. So there were a couple of different milestones in my career, and I think a big part of holding on to my passion for this career is always looking for new things to inspire me, always looking for new milestones to be proud of. But probably the big 3 for me, the first one was when I assisted with someone's senior thesis project. They were either a coder or an animator or something, and they were working on an independent game. It wasn't like an official game, but it was like, hey, for my final project, I have to like create a 3D world and like a stage, like a platformer, like Crash Bandicoot, that type of thing, as like a proof of concept. And they wanted someone to voice the little guide character that follows your main character around. And so I offered my services because a lot of people on campus knew me as the voiceover guy by that point. Um, and they did like a makeshift recording booth. It was literally like just these 4 prop walls like you'd see in theaters, but with like acoustic foam glued onto them and stuff like that. And it wasn't an official booth by any means, but when I stepped into this little square that was sitting in the center of the room with a microphone in front of it, like that whole time that I was in the square, the outside world did not matter to me. I was just this character. I was focused on the script. I was focused on the director. And like my brain just instantly knew this is something that I want to be doing long term. So that was kind of the moment that made me realize this is something I want to pursue for myself. The moment that made me realize it was something I could do for others, where I could actually entertain other people and not just myself, was the finals and the award ceremony of Anime Expo's AX Idol in 2019. Hold on, my laptop is going to die if I don't plug this in. I forgot to
No
actually plug
problem,
it in.
dude. Take your time. I'm here all day.
We're good. We're good. No, it's because I have to move this laptop back and forth between my studio and out here, and I have to make sure I plug it in when I bring it up. All right,
Yeah.
we're good. At AX Idol, because that was when, I mean, it was a glorified performance because it was on a stage in front of like an anime convention theater full of people, whereas actual recording will take place in a very isolated booth. But it was the fact that I was doing this anime cutscene in front of probably literally 1,000 people, and they were entertained by it. Like they were clapping, they were hooting, they were hollering. Was just kind of the sign of like, hey, this isn't just something selfish. It's something that you can do well, that other people are willing to pay for and are entertained by. And then I think the professional version for me, it's been an ongoing process. The first one was when my first named role as Diabel in Sword Art Online went live on Toonami, and I had that moment of my colleagues going, because you know, this is way back in the amateur years, you know, so you had everyone that was just like hopeful and aspirational and practicing, and now here's me, this guy who's like, hey, my voice is on the Adult Swim block that we all watch basically every weekend. And they were super jazzed about that. But then that's more of an ongoing process where, as I've booked more roles, you know, as people interview me or tell me about how they've been inspired to try voice acting in the same way that I was inspired to get started in voice acting, that's kind of like my little constant reminder, like, hey, you're doing a good job, you know, you're being passionate, you're motivating those around you, and that's a substantial part of what keeps me engaged in this industry.
That's really, really cool. So were you anyhow a superhero fan growing up?
I wouldn't say I was crazy about it the way that some people were crazy about Star Trek or Star Wars or stuff like that. But I definitely remember seeing like the Superman animated series all the time. I remember watching Batman Beyond and having it on in the background when I was working on homework. Spider-Man, ironically, I feel like I saw Spider-Man the least out of any of the other superheroes when it came to the shows that were on in the afternoon. But in retrospect, I feel like that kind of works out because I didn't let my performance be patterned too much by like what I heard in the past. A lot of how I experienced superheroes was actually through comics, and it was usually through when we go to comic shops and I would just read them for funsies while my parents were shopping around, or especially when we were in the doctor's office or the dentist's office and they would have like comics available for kids to read along with the Where's Waldo books. So most of my comic experience came from when I was waiting to get like my teeth checked out and I was just reading whatever the most recent Amazing Spider-Man or, you know, Marvel's superheroes was in the office.
Awesome. Which leads me to my question to Marvel's Avengers.
Mm.
So how did Marvel's Avengers come about for you? Did you have to audition for it? Did they come to you, or how did that work exactly?
Yeah, I mean, the process is pretty much the same regardless of whether it's an indie project or a AAA, you know, blockbuster. What usually happens in regards to union work is that the client will send out, they'll put out character sides to all these agencies in the area and say, we're looking to cast for these characters. It may be codenamed, it may not be. For example, stuff like Marvel's Avengers and Mortal Kombat 11 were heavily codenamed. Like none of the characters were named what their actual name was. The project name was not the same as the actual project name. Sometimes they'll include like minor details or key terms where you're like, oh, this is a Halo game. Oh, this is, you know, a Dead Space game or something like that. But most of the time, they're going to scrub any identifying information off of it. And then the agencies will send out those auditions to talent on their roster based on their understanding of what roles they might play. So, for example, I believe I only got the audition for Spider-Man. Maybe I'm trying to remember if they sent me any others. Maybe I got one for like Captain America or something like that. But historically, they'd probably send, you know, Tony Stark to an older male who's got kind of like a slight ruggedness to him. They'd probably send the auditions for Captain America to someone who sounds a lot older than I do. But of course, my voice print is within that age range for Spidey. So of course, they ended up sending me the auditions for Spider-Man. And then I recorded the auditions and sent them out. And I believe, well, actually, in this case, I believe either they did a callback or they had me come in physically. I think for this one, they had me come in physically. This was after we had the chance to get vaccinated. So I actually went to a studio and we did the audition from there with the script that they had provided. And then a couple months later, they emailed me back and said, hey, they chose you. So
that is awesome, by the way. So there is no shortage of Spider-Man content, as we're seeing with, you know, from especially the last 2 years with Into the Spider-Verse, the MCU and whatnot. And there is the other Spider-Man video game series with Yuri Lowenthal playing the role. So what was your goal with your version of Spider-Man? How did you go about making this Spider-Man your own versus all the others?
So it was a mix of, this happens a lot with new character challenges that I have to deal with. And it's a mixture of what is familiar to me versus what is different. The familiarity, I did rely on what I knew of the Marvel Cinematic Universe because we'd been seeing the movies over several years. And I really liked the more youthful tone that was presented in that universe. But I also knew that I couldn't make it a perfect one-to-one. And for me, Early on, I was actually just really scared, like really nervous. Cause you mentioned like having people like Yuri Lowenthal playing, Spider-Man in the PS4 games. And I'm like, how am I supposed to measure up to that? Like that's such Yuri used to be one of the people, or he still is one of the people that I look up to. Like, I want to be as prolific as you someday. Um, so that nervousness, kind of risked taking me out of my headspace. And I kind of ended up playing on that where I was like, okay, well, think about how nervous and how fearful you are right now, and imagine how Peter Parker would feel as Spider-Man in this universe where he doesn't really get to interact with kids his age. He has to fight to literally protect the lives of people he's never even known, because if he fails, they very well might die or get grievously harmed. And that's a huge amount of pressure. And so I figured, rather than trying to focus on the voice, I was going to just focus on the feelings, on the emotions, on what Spider-Man must be going through. Because maybe if you're nervous, your voice cracks a little bit when you go up and you feel kind of sheepish and you tuck your neck in and your shoulders are all hunched up. And maybe, when you have those moments when you feel in control, you'll puff your chest out and you'll get a little bit more of that baritone. So I figured, as long as I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to be doing, that if I just let myself be guided by how I felt in that moment, that the voice would find itself. At the end of the day, voice acting is about acting. It's not just doing a voice. So I figured if I can just focus on the acting part of it, the voice will follow. And even if the voice doesn't end up fitting perfectly, if the acting is good enough, generally what you'll see is that people are willing to like absorb the voice and get used to it, versus if the voice is perfect but the acting is garbage. I can't think of a single situation where anyone has been like, I'm willing to let this pass because the voice just sounds so good, even though the delivery is horrible, So, priorities.
Did you have any interaction with the Marvel's Avengers cast prior to or during your
No.
recording session?
No, I got to hear snippets from parts that had already been recorded, but especially given that this was remote recording, once we actually got around to recording for it, like even if we were doing it in studio, usually the only time that you'll interact with other cast members is if you happen to be going in at the same time that they're coming out. Like if you guys have, shared booth space or booth times, like 2:30 to 3 and then 3 to 3:30. But because it was at home, like I never crossed paths with any of them. I would love to get to, meet them and be like, hey, I'm glad to be a part of this project with you, but I don't know.
Yeah. So again, we certainly had no short of Spider-Man content. Obviously, this month marks the month of No Way Home Spider-Man.
Mhm.
And this, I believe it's going to be next year that marks the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man's first appearance in the comic books.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, 60 years. Wow. Can you believe that?
I can, but it's like, as someone who hasn't even been alive, I've been barely alive for over half that time.
Yeah.
So like it's hard to conceptualize.
So what to you makes Spider-Man such an enduring and compelling character, especially during this time?
I I think it's the idea that he doesn't have everything going for him either. Like, yes, he happens to have superpowers in comparison to someone like Batman, but that doesn't mean he automatically knows how to use them perfectly. I mean, especially if you look at the more recent films, a lot of his character development is about making mistakes, sometimes really big mistakes, and then, having to grow from that and figure out how to take care of the problem that he's just created. And I feel like that's probably one of the most identifiable parts of um his character to us as an audience. He's not perfect like Superman. He doesn't have basically everything going for him like Captain America. He and Captain America is also from a time that many people of our ages don't understand, because we weren't alive back then. um he uh he doesn't solve his problems with money. He has to solve it with his wits and what physical prowess that he can offer. And often, a lot of the problems that he solves aren't solved via his superhero powers. That just comes when he has to beat up bad guys. It's through navigating tense conversations and tense situations through his words and through, his thought processes and through his planning. And these are all things that normal human beings can do as well. And I feel like that's what makes him easy for audiences to connect to is, yes, he's a superhero, but being a superhero is not the automatic answer to all of his issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with everything you said. So, have they told, one last question before we end the interview? Have they told you anything more about possible more expansions of the Avengers game with maybe a little more Spider-Man for you in the
No,
future?
I generally when voice actors are brought in to do their recordings, they are one of the last steps of the process in most cases. Like the animation's been fleshed out, or at least they have an animatic, the script's been written, and at this point they're just putting in the voice so that they can mold the character lip flaps around it. So while I know about the stuff that I recorded for at this moment, I have no idea regarding any future content. Now, if they did make additional content in the future for Spider-Man, I would hope that they choose to bring me back rather than just re-recording everything with a new talent or recasting me with a new talent. But it's not a guarantee, so I don't want to put all my eggs into one basket. And I would only find out around the time that they're pretty much done with implementing that content. So
God.